In America, if a city wants to launch a massive public works project, the clock starts ticking, and on average, it will take anywhere from 7 to 14 years just to get a shovel in the dirt. Up to 14 years of waiting before a single piece of steel is laid down or a single drop of cement is poured. That massive time frame, that relentless gauntlet of environmental impact studies, public hearings, legal battles, budget overhauls, political gridlock, and final green lights, is simply accepted as the norm. It is viewed as the price we pay to do things the right way. We call it due process. And practically every major Western democracy has its own variation of this system. Practically every major Western democracy holds it up as the ultimate proof of a healthy, functioning society. Yet, in that exact same 14-year window, China constructed an entire city, not a master plan neighborhood, not a new light rail line, not a sprawling residential suburb grafted onto the edge of an existing town, an entire metropolis, built from absolute scratch on empty land, fully designed, fully financed, complete with its own municipal government, its own standalone economy, its own massive population, its own towering skyline, and its own distinct place within the infrastructure network of one of the biggest countries on the planet. A sprawling urban center where absolutely nothing existed before, all finished in 14 years. And then they built another, and another, all while that first city was still undergoing construction. The real question that urban designers, financial experts, and civil engineers have been obsessively asking for the past 2 decades is not whether China is actually pulling this off. We know they are. Satellite imagery proves it. Demographic shifts prove it. Massive economic output proves it. The question they keep asking, the one that dominates academic papers, federal studies, and global summits, is how. How exactly does a nation conceptualize, finance, authorize, engineer, construct, populate, and maintain massive cities in less time than it takes most democratic nations to approve a single new airport terminal? The truth is, when you take a hard look at what China has actually accomplished, the answer is not a reassuring one for the nations. Asking that question, before we dive any deeper into this, take a second and leave a comment below. Let me know what part of the world you are watching from, and what time it is right there. And if you are new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This is the place where the most incredible stories on Earth are told. Let's get into it. The city that changed the rules of human settlement forever is Shenzhen. Back in 1979, Shenzhen was nothing more than a fishing village, not a mid-sized town on the verge of a boom, not a forgotten municipality with untapped resources, an actual fishing village with barely 30,000 residents. It was just a cluster of modest structures sitting on the southern edge of Guangdong province, cut off from Hong Kong by the waters of the Shenzhen River. At that exact moment in history, that physical border also served as the dividing line between 2 completely alien economic realities. Looking across to the Hong Kong side, you saw a towering, glittering, globally connected financial powerhouse, home to 5 million people. Looking back at the Shenzhen side, you saw wooden fishing boats and agricultural fields. Then, in 1980, Deng Xiaoping officially declared Shenzhen a special economic zone, and the explosion of growth that followed is the single event that every historian studying rapid urbanization will inevitably point to. Not simply because it was the most massive expansion, and not just because it was the most rapid, but because it managed to be both of those things at the exact same time, reaching a scale that defied all known precedents of human civilization. Fast forward to today, and Shenzhen boasts a population of over 18 million residents. Its gross domestic product dwarfs that of several European countries. If you look at its skyline, you will count more super-tall skyscrapers, towers stretching over 300 meters into the air, than you will find in New York City. Its shipping port ranks among the top 5 busiest on the globe. It serves as the worldwide home base for tech giants like Huawei, BYD, DJI, and Tencent. It has a subway network that stretches across more than 350 kilometers of track. It is packed with world-class hospitals, universities, cultural museums, performance halls, and a massive international airport that processes upward of 40 million travelers every single year. And every piece of this was willed into existence in just 45 years. A leap from 30,000 locals to 18 million citizens. From a fleet of wooden fishing boats to one of the most hyper-productive economic engines on the planet. All within the working lifespan of a single human being. In all of recorded history, no urban center has ever expanded with this kind of ferocity. Not Chicago during the industrial boom of the 19th century. Not Los Angeles in the 20th century. Not Dubai. Not Singapore. If you look at the closest historical comparisons for explosive city growth, they expanded at maybe 1/10 the velocity of Shenzhen. Shenzhen is not just an accelerated version of a known phenomenon. It represents an entirely new category of human development that simply did not exist until it happened, and the physical backbone required to sustain that explosion is just as staggering as the population boom itself. When Shenzhen first triggered its massive expansion in the early 80s, it possessed no highway system, no freight rail links, no deep water shipping terminals, and absolutely no electrical grid capable of handling massive industrial output. Every single one of these systems had to be built all at once, exactly as millions of people were flooding in, and exactly as the massive factory floors needed to employ them were being erected. The metropolis was fabricated, filled with citizens, and put to work all at the exact same moment, driven by a singular tidal wave of human migration. And this all occurred within a window of time so tight that Western city planners wouldn't even consider it adequate for mapping out a single local district, much less a sprawling metropolitan economy. When American infrastructure experts are asked what it would actually take to mirror the Shenzhen miracle, they all give the same exact answer. It is fundamentally impossible under the legal and regulatory constraints of any Western democracy. Just acquiring the real estate, seizing and reallocating 30,000 square kilometers of terrain that previously belonged to rural farmers, coastal fisheries, and centuries-old village settlements, would demand decades of grueling legal litigation. Financing the foundational infrastructure would force funding bills through multiple shifting political administrations, with every new group of politicians threatening to undo the progress of the last. The sheer velocity at which Shenzhen materialized cannot be separated from the political machine that forged it. And depending on your perspective, that is either the entire point or it is the ultimate problem. Shenzhen was the ultimate proof of concept, and every single thing China has built since then is simply the application of that concept. The cities weren't empty. They were simply waiting. For roughly a decade, starting in the early 2000s, a specific narrative took hold of Western media outlets, becoming one of the most widely circulated talking points regarding China's rapid development. The phenomenon of ghost cities. Reports were filled with images of completely vacant skyscrapers, desolate shopping centers, and multi-lane expressways devoid of any vehicle traffic. These were entirely finished urban zones with virtually no inhabitants. High-resolution satellite pictures showcased thousands of pristine apartment buildings standing silent across the nation's interior provinces. Journalists filmed themselves exploring eerily quiet streets that felt as though they had been engineered for a population that simply forgot to show up, and the consensus among global observers was practically identical. China had committed a monumental planning blunder. They had poured billions into constructing infrastructure for a future that was never going to happen. The city of Ordos, located in Inner Mongolia, became the ultimate poster child for this apparent failure. This brand new metropolis was erected right next to the historic, coal-dependent old city of Ordos, explicitly mapped out to house 1 million new citizens. In those early media dispatches, it looked like a post-apocalyptic movie set completely desolate and ghostly. It was held up as the definitive cautionary tale of what occurs when a centralized government builds far faster than consumer demand can possibly keep pace with. But look at what the 10-year follow-up data actually revealed. Ordos Kangbashi, that supposedly abandoned ghost city, is now home to a thriving community of over 150,000 residents, and that number continues to climb. Those exact high-rises that were once photographed as empty shells are now fully occupied homes. The commercial corridors that were once captured on camera as vacant storefronts are now bustling with local businesses. The neighborhood schools are packed with children, and the local hospitals are treating patients daily. The entire project wasn't an economic disaster. It was an urban environment built a few years ahead of the specific population influx it was designed to receive. This is the exact piece of the puzzle that the original media coverage completely failed to understand. China was not constructing infrastructure to meet the demands of the present day. They were building for the immediate future, and then simply waiting for that future to arrive. Consider the macro picture. This is a nation that has successfully transitioned roughly 500 million people from agrarian villages into urban centers over the past 40 years. That single wave of domestic migration is larger than the combined populations of the United States and Canada. When you are managing a demographic shift of that magnitude, having the physical infrastructure waiting for the people is not a strategic miscalculation. It is the only mathematical way to absorb 500 million citizens without triggering a catastrophic housing shortage that would crush every municipal system simultaneously. Those ghost cities were never errors. They were prefabricated futures, and the population eventually caught up. Xiong'an New District in Zhengzhou was another major hub that frequently appeared in those early 2010s ghost city exposes. It was depicted as a massive, hyper-modern, yet largely deserted concrete desert. Today, it is teeming with activity, serving as a core piece of a wider Zhengzhou metropolis that houses over 12 million people. Then there was Kaofeidian, an ambitious planned community constructed on land reclaimed from the ocean near Tianjin. It was widely documented as a desolate monument to government overreach. Today, it operates as a vital, heavy industrial port town. The television crews that captured the emptiness packed up and went home long before the actual residents arrived. The fundamental lesson that the ghost city narrative missed is straightforward. China approaches urban development exactly how it approaches manufacturing, ahead of schedule and well ahead of the immediate demand curve. An unpopulated city is not the final failure state of the system. It is merely a temporary transitional phase. In the logic of Chinese macro planning, the true catastrophe would be failing to have the apartments, roads, and utilities completely operational by the time the migration wave hits. And when hundreds of millions of people are leaving rural villages every single decade, that migration wave always hits. The West looked at these developments and labeled them ghost cities. China looked at them and simply called them Phase 1. Now let's look at the cities below. The world of underground China. When most people picture a modern metropolis, their eyes go directly to what is visible on the surface: the soaring towers, the street grids, the grand bridges, and the public plazas that define our shared civic experience. But that only represents 50% of the layout. In China's primary urban centers, the other half of the metropolis sits directly beneath your feet. Beijing features a massive subterranean labyrinth that actually predates the modern economic boom. It is a sprawling grid of tunnels dug throughout the 1960s and 70s as a defensive bomb shelter system, spanning more than 85 square kilometers beneath the nation's capital, with the capacity to shield 300,000 people. But that historic system is an artifact of the past. What China is engineering right now is a completely different tier of urban planning. Shanghai's underground infrastructure includes a breathtaking 700 kilometers of subway tunnels, cementing it as the single longest metro network on Earth by total route length. Yet the passenger rail lines are just the superficial layer of this subterranean world. Beneath and wrapped around those transit tubes, Shanghai has engineered a massive, interconnected underworld packed with commercial retail plazas, pedestrian avenues, subterranean parking facilities built for hundreds of thousands of vehicles, main utility hubs, server data centers, and specialized freight passages. This allows commercial merchandise to flow directly from regional warehouses straight to the retail floors without ever adding a single delivery truck to the surface traffic. In several parts of downtown Shanghai, you can complete a multi-kilometer commute entirely underground through temperature-controlled, retail-lined concourses, without ever breaking the surface into the open air. Meanwhile, Wuhan, a metropolis of 11 million citizens, executed what stands as arguably the most comprehensive subterranean urban matrix ever realized in a single building phase anywhere on Earth. The central Wuhan underground network spans more than 15 square kilometers of integrated shopping, transit, and logistics space directly beneath the heart of the city. It seamlessly locks together passenger rail, consumer retail, parking garages, heavy utility lines, and emergency management structures into one cohesive subterranean ecosystem. This entire footprint was excavated and built simultaneously, directed by a single master planning group with a unified budget on a strict timeline that no fragmented Western city council could ever hope to replicate. Over in Chengdu, the master plan for the Xiong'an New Area incorporates specialized subterranean highway rings, circular underground expressways, designed to completely strip away through traffic from the surface streets. The engineering concept is simple. The commercial trucks and daily commuters that typically choke surface lanes are funneled down into these subterranean loops, where they can travel unhindered at high speeds. This leaves the surface world completely open for pedestrian pathways and bike lanes. The system is already partially operational and growing by the day. The core motivation behind China's massive financial commitment to underground infrastructure is explicitly detailed in their official urban planning blueprints. When surface-level real estate in prime metropolitan zones hits maximum capacity, the only viable direction for urban growth that actually preserves the daily quality of life above ground is to go down. China isn't excavating these massive underworlds because they have literally run out of land. They are doing it because they have collectively decided that surface space in high-density areas is far too valuable to be wasted on passenger cars, utility poles, and delivery trucks that can easily be buried out of sight. The final product is an entire dimension of Chinese urban civilization that the vast majority of tourists never see, and that the bulk of international journalism completely ignores. A parallel urban landscape operating right below the sidewalk, climate-controlled, financially productive, and expanding with every passing year. The skyline above is what catches your attention, but the city below is what makes that skyline possible. Now consider the cities built on waterland that simply did not exist. China features roughly 18,000 kilometers of coastline. It also houses 4 billion citizens, faces severe land shortages along its heavily populated eastern seaboard, and possesses a relentless drive to construct infrastructure where it seems physically impossible. The workaround that China has pushed harder than any other nation on Earth, even more aggressively than the Netherlands, who practically invented the idea of taking land back from the ocean, is to manufacture brand new real estate, where there used to be only water. Look at the Pearl River Delta, the region where Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Hong Kong converge around a shallow harbor. The shoreline you view on modern satellite maps today is not the boundary that nature carved out. Massive stretches of what is currently heavy industrial shipping ports, sprawling housing blocks, and dense urban grids were literally at the bottom of the ocean just 3 decades ago. Cities that make up the most economically packed urban corridor globally have spilled outward onto land dragged up from the sea, filled in with layers of dredged sand and massive engineering efforts that collectively represent one of the biggest terraforming initiatives in the history of mankind. Take the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, a 55-kilometer mega-crossing linking 3 massive urban centers over open ocean. It is anchored to man-made islands that absolutely did not exist before the blueprints were drawn. They were built from scratch, equipped with tunnel entrances, toll booths, and heavy infrastructure, making them look like they had been sitting in the water forever. The bridge project required islands, so China simply built the islands. Hengqin Island near Macau was overhauled from a quiet, sparsely populated patch of land into a booming economic and research hub in just a few short years. The physical landmass of Hengqin was actually extended outward into the water. They didn't wait around for a naturally large island. They just made the island bigger, until it fit the city. Up in Tianjin, the Binhai New Area converted over 220 square kilometers of tidal mudflats and shallow seas into a fresh urban zone that over 2.5 million people now call home. Nearby Eco-City, a joint project with Singapore designed as a sustainable model, sits on former salt flats and polluted coastal waters. It boasts active subway lines and a towering business district. It was built directly on the water. Now, it is a living city. Shanghai's Xiong'an New City pushes out from the mainland into Hangzhou Bay, centered around an entirely engineered circular lake. It houses hundreds of thousands of residents, its own transit lines, and the massive Tesla Gigafactory. The facility, producing a massive chunk of Tesla's global fleet, sits in a city that wasn't even on the map when the car company was founded. The sheer volume of coastline China has manufactured over the past 30 years easily dwarfs the combined land reclamation efforts of all other civilizations throughout history. The Netherlands took hundreds of years to reclaim their territory. China achieved the equivalent in just a few decades. These places sitting on man-made land are not temporary experiments. They are permanent, thriving cities standing on the ocean floor, and they function perfectly. Then there is the city China is putting together right this very second. Xiong'an. Deep in Hebei province, roughly 110 kilometers southwest of Beijing, the single largest planned city development in global history is currently under construction. Not just the biggest in Asia, the biggest in the entire recorded history of human civilization and the building of settlements. It is called Xiong'an New Area, and the vast majority of Westerners have absolutely no idea it even exists. Rolled out in the spring of 2017, it was declared a top-tier national development zone, put on the exact same strategic pedestal as Shenzhen and Shanghai's Pudong district. The government was extremely clear with their intentions. Xiongan is engineered to be the Shenzhen of the 21st century. It is a metropolis raised from the dirt, utilizing the absolute best urban design strategies available on the planet, specifically meant to relieve the crushing population pressure of Beijing and serve as a brand new economic engine for the northern half of the country. Covering roughly 2,000 square kilometers, it aims to house around 2.5 million permanent residents in the short term, with infrastructure designed for far more later. It already features a high-speed rail line, finished in 2020, that zips passengers directly to Beijing in 50 minutes. But what truly separates Xiong'an from every other mega-project in China, or anywhere else on Earth, is the incredible technological ambition baked into its foundation. Xiong'an isn't being built to meet today's standard codes, with the hope of upgrading later. The infrastructure of tomorrow is being installed as the baseline foundation. Every single structure in Xiong'an must tie into a master underground utility grid. This subterranean network houses power lines, fiber optic cables, water mains, and climate control tubes, all easily reachable for routine repairs without ever tearing up the street above. You won't see wooden power poles, you won't see hanging wires, and you won't see ripped-up pavement for water main breaks. The vital organs of the city run below, keeping the surface completely clean. The street network itself is mapped out with self-driving cars as the default primary assumption, not an afterthought. The lane geometry, the stoplight timing, and the embedded digital sensors are fully calibrated for autonomous vehicles so that when the world eventually shifts to self-driving fleets, this city won't need an expensive retrofit. It was waiting for them before they even arrived. A massive digital sensor network tracking traffic flow, air pollution, power usage, and public space density is written right into the construction code. Not because all of this technology was cheap to install when Xiong'an was mapped out, but because officials made the calculated decision that by the time the city is fully populated, this will be the bare minimum expected standard, and installing it on day one is far cheaper than ripping up the city to add it later. They are even building a subterranean logistics network where self-driving carts ferry cargo from distribution hubs to local shops and apartments, keeping heavy freight trucks completely off the pedestrian streets above. The surface level is reserved for human beings. The heavy logistics go underground. The construction schedule for Xiong'an pushes out into the mid-2030s, and the ultimate vision is protected by a governing authority that can make a 20-year commitment and execute it without the constant threat of a new political administration coming into power and pulling the plug. No upcoming election will cancel Xiongan. No sudden change in leadership will cut its funding. No Western democracy has attempted to build a city of this ambition in the modern era. Not because the blueprints are impossible, and not because the housing demand doesn't exist. It is because the unique blend of absolute planning authority, massive capital funding, and rapid execution required to turn open fields into a functional mega-city in under 20 years simply cannot exist within any democratic system that has ever been tried. Xiong'an is China building the exact city that no other system on Earth can build. And the concrete is already in the ground. Finally, there are the cities that can actually think. Smart, urban China. In Hangzhou, the hometown of tech giant Alibaba, an artificial intelligence system known as City Brain controls the local traffic grid with an unmatched level of automation. This software digests live feeds from thousands of street cameras, tracking cars on every major avenue. It adjusts traffic lights on the fly to keep vehicles moving smoothly, spots crashes instantly, clears paths for ambulances, and feeds everything back to a central control room where human operators just supervise the computer's work. The payoff? Hangzhou's severe traffic congestion dropped from the 5th worst in the country all the way down to 57th. Ambulance travel times were slashed by 15%. The software catches accidents quicker than human watchers. It responds faster. It never gets fatigued, and it doesn't need a shift change. The roads are managed by code, and the code simply does a better job than the humans it replaced. This system proved so incredibly successful that Alibaba has since rolled it out in cities all over China and even exported custom versions to municipalities in Malaysia, Thailand, and the UAE. Technology designed for Chinese streets is now the gold standard that other nations are paying to import. But managing cars is just the absolute basics. In a district of Guangzhou, digital sensors baked into the pavement and bridges monitor the physical health of the concrete. They check water pipe pressure to detect leaks before the pipes burst. They track air quality down to the street level, and they monitor crowd density in parks to prevent stampedes. The city actively predicts when a bridge or pipe will break, allowing maintenance crews to fix the issue before an actual emergency happens. The city is essentially learning to cure its own sicknesses before they take hold. In Shenzhen, the digital command center pulls information from over 1 million different connected sensors, from weather stations to power grids to smart buildings, giving city leaders a perfect, real-time snapshot of how an 18 million person city is functioning at any given second. This is not a tech demo or a small trial run. Over 300 Chinese cities are actively installing various forms of these digital brains. The smart city isn't a futuristic buzzword discussed in boardrooms. It is a live operating system that is currently improving the daily lives of millions of people in cities larger than most European countries. While the rest of the world debates theories on how to make fast-growing urban centers livable, China is running the real-world experiment at maximum scale right now. When we started this video, the primary question was straightforward. How does a nation build entire cities faster than most local governments can rubber stamp a single building permit? By now, after everything you have just seen, you know the answer is anything but simple. Shenzhen wasn't magic. It was a highly calculated choice about what land should be used for, how fast leaders had to act, and how much human disruption was acceptable to forge a new reality. The ghost cities weren't blunders. They were future neighborhoods prepared well ahead of the largest human migration in history, built by a government that knew the people were coming and needed roofs over their heads the second they arrived. The critics pointed cameras at empty buildings, but eventually, the population moved in. The vast underground networks weren't acts of extravagance. They were highly logical solutions for a nation that realized surface space is far too valuable to waste on parking lots and power lines. The man-made island cities weren't acts of arrogance. They were the exact same logic applied to a different problem: If you run out of land, you just build on the ocean. The Netherlands did the same thing 5 centuries ago. China just multiplied the scale by 1,000. Xiong'an isn't a vanity project. It is the ultimate test to see if the exact same civilization that built the biggest dams, the longest ocean bridges, and the most massive high-speed rail networks on the planet can construct the definitive 21st century city from absolute scratch, not forcing modern tech into an old, aging city map, but building it perfectly from the very first underground tunnel. Every other country on the globe is looking at cities built 100 years ago and struggling to drag them into the modern era. China is just printing new ones. The cities they are raising right now have no historical equal, simply because the society building them refuses to view history as a strict boundary line. To them, precedent is just a starting block. If you are still watching all the way to the end, thank you. Make sure you hit subscribe and drop that comment down below right now. What part of the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it on your clock? We read every single one.